Hi, my name is Karen Clark. I'm a certified diversity practitioner with Citywide Training and Development with the City of Columbus. Today's class is Implicit Bias. The first thing I would like for you to do is to definitely check us out on Facebook and LinkedIn and share some comments and feedback regarding our classes. Now, a few classroom announcements. You should have two packets, the first of which is the Implicit Bias packet. It looks like this. And then you will also have a case study packet. We will be looking at information from both of these packets as we go through our course today. The first thing I would like for you all to do is to sit back for a moment. We have a message from the mayor.
Hello. One of the first acts as the new mayor of Columbus was creating the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, because increasing workforce and supplier opportunities for minorities and women is a priority for my administration. Part of the work in creating these opportunities means examining ourselves for implicit bias, something you're about to undertake. We all have implicit biases. This training will help us to be able to better identify and manage them. I've participated in similar training, as have all members of the city's leadership team and many other employees. It's an important step toward leveling the playing field for access to city contracts and toward employment decisions that will make the City of Columbus an even better place to work.
As the mayor mentioned, one of his first acts as mayor was to establish the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in 2016. The office has 4 focus areas. Those areas are workforce diversity, supplier diversity, diverse outreach, and internal diverse leadership, commitment, and communication. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion has put together 2 definitions, one for diversity and one for inclusion. Diversity defined as unique differences in thought, beliefs, values, and life experience among many other human and cultural characteristics based on who we are and where we come from. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Who we are. We are all different. We all have individual DNA, and we've all grown up in different places. So if we boil down that definition for diversity, we would say who we are and where we come from. Now, the definition for inclusion: leveraging, engaging, and valuing human and cultural differences to help deliver the most creative, innovative, and impactful results for the employees and residents of the City of Columbus. Now, let's look at this definition a little more. Inclusion is being asked to participate. Look at it this way. Diversity is being asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. It's value added. So now that we have those 2 definitions put together, let's go over our learning objectives for today. And I want to refer you to your learning packet. And we're on the left side of the packet. Our learning objectives for today are, we're going to break down the definition of implicit bias. Terms like diversity and inclusion and implicit bias have become buzz phrases that have lost their meaning, so we're going to really break down those 2 words and rediscover what they mean. Then we're going to review different types of biases, moving on to understanding effects of bias. Then we're going to take an implicit association test, also known as an IAT. And then finally, after we've done all this talking about what implicit bias is, how it affects every aspect of our lives, we need a plan. What's our call to action? We will then have a list of 7 things that you can begin to do to address implicit bias. So, let's get started.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean. But I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing. Fish and chips, pheasants, clotted cream, bangers and mash, Guinness, ploughman's lunch, a spot of tea, a pint of ale.
If this does ever happen to you, the first thing I would advise that you do is apologize. We all make mistakes, and the apology seems to be a lost art among us these days. But if you find yourself in this uncomfortable situation, the other party will understand if you apologize and let them know that your intent wasn't to stereotype them in any way, but you're trying to learn. But remember, your intent needs to be sincere. So as promised, let's begin with breaking down the phrase implicit bias. The word implicit means insinuated, hinted at. It is an adjective. It means implied rather than expressly or explicitly stated. An example would be the look you get from your partner or roommate when you drop dirty laundry on the floor. That's not a spoken statement, it's all in the eyes. Don't be a slob, pick up your dirty laundry. Implicit thoughts are in our subconscious mind versus thoughts that are in our conscious mind, as you see here in our illustration. Next, let's look at the definition for the word bias. Now, bias has a bad rap. People immediately think if they say they have a bias or someone says they have a bias, they start feeling bad about themselves, and that is not the case. Bias is a noun. It means prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group when compared with another, sometimes in a way considered to be unfair. Now, if you recall from our definition of diversity, we talked about who we are and where we come from. So by the sheer virtue of differences in our human experience, we each harbor bias in some way because we're all bringing something a little different to the table. Now, you'll see in our illustration here that bias goes far beyond race and gender. Many times when we have discussions about diversity and inclusion or implicit bias, the usual suspects are race and gender, but there's many other dimensions of diversity. We have weight bias, age bias, education bias, nationality bias, religion bias, disability, appearance, sexuality, skin tone. And these are just a few of the many dimensions of diversity that we encounter. Now, our example for the word bias, your bias against nannies are causing us to ignore the best caregiving option for our infant. So with that, they're not considering a man or a woman being the best option for taking care of a child. Now let's look at the term implicit bias. That's on the right side of your main packet. So let's look there. Implicit bias, also known as unconscious bias, implicit social cognition, or implicit associations. Now you might ask, what is an implicit association? Now, I already talked about the example of the male nanny, or the nanny who happened to be male. But if I were to ask you what immediately comes to mind when I say the word nanny, 9 times out of 10, the response would be a woman. That is an implicit association. It's a cultural thing, but in our culture, we automatically think professions such as nannies and or nurses are female. Implicit bias also refers to attitudes and stereotypes. They can be favorable or unfavorable assessments. So think about this. Whether you're a fan of the Browns or a fan of the Steelers, if you're a Browns fan, you have a favorable bias towards the Browns, an unfavorable bias towards the Steelers. If you're a Steelers fan, then you have a favorable bias towards the Steelers and an unfavorable bias towards the Browns. We call that bidirectional bias. So it can be favorable or unfavorable. Oftentimes it's activated involuntarily and typically resides deep in our subconscious. So let's practice a little bit and see if we can recognize where there might be some biases. I want you to look at your case study packet that you have in front of you, and we are going to discuss the case study of Carla Kaplan. Now, this particular case study is an excerpt from the book Blind Spot: Hidden Biases of Good People, and it is a real story. Now, what happened in this particular situation, Carla Kaplan was a young professor at Yale University back in the 80s. She was in her late 20s, but she looked a lot younger than that. Well, one evening she was at home and she was washing a crystal bowl. She happened to drop it and it cracked on the counter. Well, unfortunately, she tried to catch it and it cut her hand from mid-palm to wrist. She was bleeding profusely. Fortunately, her partner was there with her. He wrapped up her hand in a towel and rushed her out of the house to the Yale-affiliated hospital of New Haven. There at the hospital, her partner talked to the doctor and told the doctor that, you know, Carla loved to quilt, and quilting takes a lot of fine motor skills. And they were concerned that this injury might cause her not to be able to participate in one of her favorite activities. The doctor said, no problem. All we need to do is to stitch it up quickly. Well, as the doctor was preparing her hand to repair, a young lady who was volunteering in the ER department happened to recognize the professor and said, Professor Kaplan, what are you doing here? The doctor stopped in his tracks. He said, wait a minute, you're a professor? You're a professor here at Yale University? And she said, yes. Well, then all of a sudden, Carla found herself on a gurney being wheeled into surgery. They called in the best hand surgeon in New England. They worked on her hand for several hours, repaired it. It was good as new, and she went on her way. So we have a few questions that we'd like to address with reference to this particular case study. Question number 1, what assumptions did the doctor make about Carla when she came into the ER? The second question, what conclusions were drawn by the doctor after assessing the injury? Number 3, did the doctor discriminate against Carla? And number 4, would Carla have been treated differently if she were a man named Carl who showed up in a rumpled jacket and a pipe, like the quintessential stereotype of a professor? Now, if you look back at your case study with reference to question number 1, what assumptions did the doctor make about Carla when she came into the ER? Well, we don't really know what was in the doctor's mind. What we do know is that he quickly assessed the injury and said, all will be great, all I need to do is to stitch it up quickly. The conclusion that was drawn was, again, All he needed to do was to stitch it up quickly and send her on her way. Now in question number 3, this one is has a little more nuance to it, we'll say. Did the doctor discriminate against Carla? Well, again, that might be kind of hard to say. He, as the doctor, assessed her injury, determined that they could stitch up her hand, but it wasn't until she was identified as a professor, and not just any professor, but a professor at Yale, that she found herself being wheeled into surgery for more in-depth surgery on her hand to repair the injury. The last question, would Carla have been treated differently if she had been a man named Carl? Well, statistics tell us that that may be true, because the man may have been assumed to have been a professor versus a young woman who looked a lot younger than her actual age. We'll be referring back to Carla's hand here momentarily as we move forward when we're talking about our types of biases. So let's move forward.